Greetings, my fellow freaks and weirdos. I'm Tom, and welcome to Monster Gab, where we love to talk about classic and vintage horror. And in today's episode, I'd really like to talk about this wonderful collection of ghost stories by M.R. James. Now, this was actually a very thoughtful gift from my good friend Hayley and daughter Izzy. So, hi guys, thank you so much. This really was a tremendous and thoughtful gift. Not the same Hayley that I mentioned in my Pet Sematary review, by the way. It turns out that I actually have several friends with the name of Hayley. I'm guessing it's a very popular name. Regardless of that, I genuinely think the book does deserve a review. It's a wonderful collection of just very short ghost stories, easy to pick up, great to just kind of read before you go to bed and give you the chills before you go to sleep. Now, I have many books based on horror. In fact, all of my books are based on horror, but I would say 90% of them are to do with the paranormal or ghosts. For instance, I've got a collection of ghost stories there, or a book of horrors. Most of them are to do with the paranormal. And I've also got this collection by Henry James. We all know The Turning of the Screw, which is a classic story, but there are other ghost stories there too. It seems to be my go-to. I don't know why, I just kind of feel like the ghosts and the paranormal are something that really do kind of give me the shivers. I'm not a believer myself, but each to their own. However, the idea of ghosts still does kind of scare me. You know, things that go bump in the night, or something you don't quite understand, or a mystery that has to be solved, that kind of thing. So, Ghost Stories by M.R. James, like I said, it is a collection of short stories. Now, M.R. James was born in 1862 and studied at Cambridge, which is where he spent most of his life. The idea of his ghost stories were to entertain his friends, mostly around Christmas time or Christmas Eve. Could you imagine in the late 1800s or early 1900s on a cold winter's night, sat around a fire, listening to someone telling you eerie ghost stories? I just think the idea is absolutely brilliant. They're not just your typical generic haunted house ghost stories where somebody died in a foul manner and a mystery has to be solved. Well, there is a little bit of that in there, but there are more to his stories than just that. A lot of his stories contain curses or ancient artifacts, and when they've been disturbed, they release some kind of menace. Sometimes it's a case of returning that artifact to its rightful place or solving the mystery behind the curse. What I enjoy about M.R. James's style of writing is it's quite simple. He gets to the point fairly quickly. There doesn't tend to be much of a backstory, which is kind of understandable because his stories are fairly short, but like I said, he gets to the point and they're ideal for a quick fix. If you just want like a little pick-me-up and a short kind of horror burst, if you like, before you go to bed, it's totally ideal. The stories are fairly easy to understand and they're not too complex. In fact, if I compare him to Henry James, who wrote The Turning of the Screw, a renowned and well-recognised author, personally I find Henry James just a little bit hard-going at times, and I feel like his writing does go off on a bit of a tangent. That's just my opinion, by the way. Henry James's stories are fairly short too, but I feel like he found it necessary to put more backstory into his tales, which is totally fine, but sometimes I found them a little bit too wordy, and often I found his writing style to be just complex for the sake of being complex. Again, just my opinion. I still totally love Henry James's stories, especially The Turn of the Screw, which got turned into one of my favourite horror movies, The Innocents. It's a brilliant ghost story, but like I said, if you want something kind of just easy and simple to pick up, not too wordy, then I would say M.R. James's ghost stories are the way to go. That's not to say that M.R. James wasn't a wordsmith. His writing style was totally intellectual, and his stories are really gripping. I would go as far as saying that the simplicity of his writing style makes his stories a lot more enjoyable. Usually when I read these kind of stories, I'm almost ready for bed, so I don't want to read something that's too complex or makes me have to think too much. And that's where these ghost stories really do tick a lot of boxes for me. Now, as far as reviewing this book is concerned, it is a little bit difficult because it isn't one big story, it is a collection of short stories, and I can't review each and every one, so I'm just going to pick a couple that have really kind of stuck out to me. The first story I'd like to talk about is Casting of the Runes, originally published in 1911. It's technically not a ghost story as it's mostly based on a curse, but a lot of paranormal activity does take place. Two brothers each receive a note which explains to them that they are both the bearer of a curse which will cause them to die in 3 months' time. Now, the idea of this story is that for anyone to receive this curse, they have to accept it first, which is fairly unlikely. I mean, who's going to accept a curse that causes you to die in 3 months' time? In this case, the characters have accepted their curse subliminally, so I suppose I should explain how that works. For argument's sake, let's say that somebody drops their wallet in the middle of the street. You could pick that wallet up and put a piece of paper on there which bears the curse, providing that the bearer accepts it. You then tap the person on the shoulder and say, "Is this yours?" And if they say yes, they've basically accepted the curse. Obviously that person was referring to the wallet, but in this case it doesn't matter. If the words are spoken, you have accepted the curse. In this case, the curse states that the characters will die in 3 months' time, and during that time a lot of scary paranormal activity takes place. The paranormal activity is obviously there to frighten the audience, but it's quite relevant to the story also. For instance, the characters in this story are totally on edge, as there seems to be some kind of expiry date to their life now, and as they're getting closer to that date, the tension keeps building and building. It's almost a case that the curse is actually they're just going to be frightened to death or experience some kind of heart attack. What really did interest me about this story is, though I've never read it before, it seemed very, very familiar the further I got into it. And that's because there was actually a movie made in 1957 called Night of the Demon. One of my favourite movies too. Despite the fact I've only seen it a couple of times, I really enjoyed it. But I had no idea it was actually based on a short story. I've no doubt that it does state it in the opening or ending credits, but you know, that's my ignorance, I suppose. Anyway, I found it quite interesting because both the stories in the short story and the movie have a great climactic ending, which obviously I'm not going to tell you because that would be a major spoiler, but they both share a fantastic ending which really does make the story. In fact, many of the stories in this collection are just a big build-up. There does seem to be a lot of mystery, and it's kind of hard to work out what's going on until you get to the end. But again, that just makes it more gripping, that makes you more intrigued to read the story and find out what's going on and what the outcome will be. One more story that I'll just mention then is the story Lost Hearts, which was published in 1895. The story is about a young boy named Stephen Elliott who has recently become an orphan and goes to live with his much older cousin in his cousin's huge and glorious country mansion. The mansion itself actually plays a big part in this story, as it's fairly big and openly spaced, and not many people live there. With that being the case, this story already feels fairly haunting without any ghosts being thrown into the mix. But that's not to say that there aren't any. Now, the story is not told from a first-person perspective, but it does feel like it at times. You really do feel like you are in Stephen's shoes a lot of the time when you're reading through the pages. And that in itself is a fairly interesting concept, and a very scary one too when you think about it. Imagine yourself being a very young boy in a place that you're not familiar with. There's lots of open space, and at night the hallways can feel very eerie. Although there aren't many characters in the story, the characters are fairly interesting, especially Stephen's older cousin, Mr. Abney. He seems to be a very friendly, welcoming and educated gentleman, but there is more to him than meets the eye. It's almost like he's just a bit too nice, and it gives you the feeling of untrustworthiness. And that's about as much as I'm going to say about his character, because again, I'm not going to give away any spoilers. Going back to M.R. James's writing style, as I mentioned earlier, it's fairly simplistic, but it's still very powerful, especially in this particular story. It really did kind of put its hooks in me at times. In fact, I'm going to read you a passage. Yeah, I'm going to do it. Like I said before, it's not written from a first-person perspective, but at times you do feel like you are in that perspective. Listen to this, see what you think. That night he had a curious dream. At the end of the passage at the top of the house in which his bedroom was situated, there was an old disused bathroom. It was kept locked, but the upper half of the door was glazed, and since the muslin curtains which used to hang there had long been gone, you could look in and see the lead-lined bath affixed to the wall on the right hand, with its head towards the window. On the night of which I'm speaking, Stephen Elliott found himself, as he thought, looking through the glazed door. The moon was shining through the window, and he was gazing at a figure which lay in the bath. His description of what he saw reminds me of what I once beheld myself in the famous vaults of St. Michan's Church in Dublin, which possesses the horrid property of preserving corpses from decay for centuries. A figure inexpressibly thin and pathetic, of a dusty leaden colour, enveloped in a shroud-like garment, the thin lips crooked into a faint and dreadful smile, the hands pressed tightly over the region of the heart. As he looked upon it, a distant, almost inaudible moan seemed to issue from its lips, and the arms began to stir. The terror of the sight forced Stephen backwards, and he awoke to the fact that he was indeed standing on the cold boarded floor of the passage in the full light of the moon. With a courage which I do not think can be common among boys of his age, he went to the door of the bathroom to ascertain if the figure of his dream were really there. It was not, and he went back to bed. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I found that quite chilling, especially when you read it at night before you go to bed yourself. Anyway, that's about as much as I'm going to say about this book. It's really great as a little pick-me-up, and I totally recommend it if you are into ghost stories, if you just want to read the odd short story now and then for that quick horror fix. It's totally perfect for that. If I'm going to give it a rating out of 10, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I have really enjoyed reading this book, and Hayley and Izzy, once again, thank you so much for this wonderful, thoughtful present. I really am truly grateful. So guys, what are your thoughts? Are you familiar with M.R. James? Have you read any of his stories? Do you have this collection? Let me know what you think. Are there any other authors of his period of time that you recommend? Please do let me know. And other ghost story collections, I really do want to hear from you. And guys, I know I bashed Henry James a little bit, and I am sorry. I do like his stuff, I really do. Anyway, that's all we got time for in this episode. Thank you so much for stopping by. And listen guys, until next time. I don't know who they are, but if you don't subscribe, they will get you. So make sure you subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new video that I post here on Monster Gab. Please be sure to leave a comment below and like the video if you did indeed like it, and share this with your friends. Thank you so much guys for stopping by. Take care. See you soon. Bye bye.